Free thought compares both sides of an equation. Evolution is the only theory protected by law, which means that you're actually not allowed to free think outside of evolution. If you have to have laws to protect your scientific theory from scrutiny, what does that tell you about your theory? Are you really allowed to be a free thinker?
Now, this is actually anti-education, because to have a good educational technique, to have critical thinking, you have to teach both sides of the issue and allow the student to decide for themselves which one they will believe.
What we cannot do in a lab is we cannot create life. We've tried every possible method, and we can't do it with all of the most high-tech instruments in the world. So you think that what couldn't come alive in a laboratory could, under controlled environment, could come to life in a violent, prehistoric environment?
Saying it's not possible right now doesn't mean it's not possible.
So you're putting your trust in something we have not yet discovered.
I'm not putting my trust in the theistic explanation of God.
But you're looking for some explanation in the future.
Yeah.
So you're putting your trust in something we have not yet discovered.
I don't want to necessarily have absolute certainty or claim absolute certainty on any position.
Really, as you use cause and effect reasoning, starting with humans and argue back where did humans come from and where did life come from, ultimately they do believe that minerals, by some random chance process, probably in water, came together to form life. Now, there's a big contradiction to that, because water destroys biological molecules. The big contradiction is that also oxygen, if molecules are trying to form in the presence of oxygen or in the presence of water, then they are destroyed faster than they could be made.
Life cannot come from non-life. That's a law of science. It's the law of biogenesis, that life cannot spontaneously create itself. And so according to evolution, or according to atheism, life would have had to come about in the water, DNA. Well, we know that DNA is destroyed by water. Water destroys DNA.
Again, oxygen and water destroy things like DNA molecules. The whole idea of evolutionary thinking simply falls apart when you take a look at it and look deeply.
It's the exact opposite of what evolution needs. So we're seeing the opposite of what they say happens. What are we supposed to believe? Fairy tale pseudoscience, or what we actually observationally see? I mean, I'm going to go with what I see. That's why I was an evolutionist, and now I believe in creation. Because when I look under the microscope and I go, wow, the exact opposite is occurring of what I was taught and told in school, and what I'm seeing is degradation everywhere I look. What other model exists? Well, there's only one model that explains this well. That's the creation model. And that's what I go with. I go with what we see and what we can test. It's the only thing that makes logical sense. Unless I want to remain in ignorance and stay an atheist, I can't do it.
Genetics is where the war against evolution is actually won, and it's won with genetic entropy.
Genetic entropy is one of the single strongest modern scientific arguments against evolution, because in genetic entropy, which is really the second law of thermodynamics as applied to genetics, as you copy information, you will inevitably destroy it, lose it, corrupt it. That's exactly what occurs in genetics. When you copy previously existing information, you have only two choices. You can either copy it perfectly or imperfectly. And so what happens is, over time, genetic information is lost, it is not gained.
We're seeing that mutations are causing cancer and disease and degradation going on inside the human body. It's the exact opposite of what evolution needs.
It proves absolutely that we started with perfect genetic information, and it's being lost over time. Today, because of the Human Genome Project completed in April of 2003, we know that we're losing 1 to 2% of our genetic information as human beings per generation. Now, we are the approximately 250th generation since creation, roughly 6,000 years ago. The truth is, we shouldn't even be here. The amount of information that's being lost should, in fact, have caused us to become extinct.
You either have to believe that somebody created the universe, which is consistent with the laws of thermodynamics, or that matter and energy created itself from nothing and that it poofed into existence magically. And so atheists will often accuse Christians of believing in magic. But here's the thing. Anybody that believes that matter and energy could create itself believes in magic by default. That is a magic act. Do you think like an explosion out of chaos produced order?
I don't know.
Do you believe in the Big Bang?
Yeah. As far as I've understood it, yes.
That's an explosion out of chaos.
Yeah.
Do you think it produced order in life?
I think it's possible. Now, do I think it's likely? Probably not.
Let's grant your argument that somehow nothing could create everything. Well, if that's the case, then how do you justify the precision of the creation? I mean, 326 million trillion gallons of water exist on Earth alone. Do you think all of those were crammed down to an infinitesimal amount of space, all those gallons of water?
See, I don't have the answer, and that's why I think...
But you believe in the Big Bang.
Right.
So you're putting confidence in something that you don't even know.
So the second law of thermodynamics is an excellent argument proving that evolution is not true. It proves that you start with the complex and end up with simple. That's exactly opposite to what evolutionary theory, or as I put it, evolutionary religion says. Well, the dust that we see in space actually proves creation. Now, there's two aspects to that. If we are taking a look outside the solar system, out into the galaxy and between galaxies, the dust in the solar system, which we can measure, is being pulled by gravity mostly into the sun, because the sun represents 98% of all the mass in the solar system, and that dust is being pulled in, but the dust does get accumulated and pulled in by the gravity of planets as well. But if the solar system were as old as evolutionists claim, then it should be dust-free. The fact of the matter is, there's plenty of dust out there. The rings around Neptune, the rings around Saturn are lumpy. Now, what does that tell you? It means that they're not old. It proves that they are young. As a matter of fact, the rings that you think about are actually very active. And the rings that are closest, for instance, to Saturn are actually being sucked into the planet and being destroyed. The rings at the outer edge are being thrown off into space by centrifugal forces. If the rings around Saturn and Neptune were in fact old, they would be completely smoothed out by now, but they are lumpy.
God flooded the world 4,400 years ago and killed every single living thing on the planet. And the only thing that survived was 2 of each kind of animal on Noah's Ark, and his family got off that boat and they repopulated the world.
The reason that they say monkeys had to surf from Africa to South America, when you ask them, where's your evidence for that? Because I just say, it's in your imagination. They'll say, no, we have evidence. What's the evidence? Well, they're like, well, we found a monkey that was trying to get on a vegetation map, and it was fossilized. And it was over in an area where it shouldn't have been. You're proving the flood, folks. It was trying to survive. Like, why else would it try to be hopping on some vegetation mat unless it was being buried by a flood? Whole whales have been found throughout the United States on the top of mountains. Now, how do you think they got there? I wonder how.
Here's the thing about whales. Because they're so heavy and fat, when they die, they float. And when they float, their carcasses start immediately being eaten. They would be eaten by birds, by sharks. You can watch it on YouTube videos even today. Watch a whale that dies. It's being consumed rapidly, and then they get beached. They fall into a beach, and then crabs and everything else eat them on top of it. Their carcass doesn't last long. Even their bones are corroded away fairly quickly. So because their carcasses degrade so quickly and so fast, there's only one way that we should ever find fossils of a whale preserved, and that would be from a flood. They would have to be buried very quickly. Now, why would we find whales on a mountain? Why would they be on hills at all? The only way that they could possibly be there is from Noah's flood. There is no other reason you would ever find a whale on a mountain unless it happened from Noah's flood. That's it. There is no other option.
If you were to step outside right now and you look at the ground, what do you see? You're going to see places where animals burrow down in. groundhog holes, snake holes. You're going to see tree roots everywhere. You're going to see trees growing. Things are constantly going down into the ground. In between the layers of the Grand Canyon, if they were slow to form, we should expect to find animal holes. Because if you look outside right now, animals are constantly burrowing down into the earth. They're constantly burrowing holes down into the dirt. In between the layers of the Grand Canyon, we don't see any animal holes. If those layers were exposed for a period of time, animals would have burrowed into those layers. Trees would have grown in the layers, plants. Wouldn't you expect to find roots in the layers? Never find them. You know what that proves is that the layers were all deposited at the same exact time.
If a layer is exposed, rain is going to fall, etching into the sedimentary rock a V-shaped erosion mark. Now that V-shaped erosion mark would be preserved when the next layer of mud came in on top and filled it in. But we don't see these V-shaped erosion marks. You will find that some layers are absolutely perfectly flat. There is nothing in between them. But the fact of the matter is that there are many things about the Grand Canyon that prove that this is not slow and gradual accumulation over millions and billions of supposed years. In fact, it is a result of one year-long worldwide flood.
What about fossilized seashells up on the top of Mount Everest? How'd they get there? Evolutionists say, well, they were pushed up through millions of years of plate tectonics. Plate tectonic shifts put them up there. Well, let's go back to fantasy land and pretend that's true.
The clams that are found there are closed. Now they have a particular protein that's in them that when they die, it gets released and it forces them to open. There's no way they can stay closed. These clams are massive. They're bigger than human beings. So the clams themselves would have easily been opened if they were just under, let's say, 1 or 2 feet of mud. They must have been buried under massive amounts of sediment. How could there be clams both buried and on the surface of Mount Everest that have not yet opened when they died? The only way that that is explained is from Noah's flood. There are no other options.
Polystratofossils. You got trees that broke off in the flood. And just like at Mount St. Helens, they'll come up and they'll float for quite a long time. Then they get waterlogged and they'll turn upside down, they'll go down and they'll lay in the sediment. They found that at Mount St. Helens. The sediment will form around it all the way up. You mean to tell me that them trees are going to stand there for millions of years while the sediment forms around it?
They teach that these rock layers are millions and millions of years old, but how can that be if they can find trees that are going through multiple layers of these supposedly millions and millions of year old rocks? That doesn't make any sense. And not only do they find upright trees, because a lot of evolutionists will try to, scramble and say, oh, well, maybe it just grew through those layers of rocks somehow, which is impossible. But they actually find upside down polystrate fossils, which just completely debunks that the Earth is millions of years old.
They have a real problem with this, and they want to tell you that the trees just stood there and they were straight up and the sediment formed around it. But no tree does that. You can't demonstrate that. You can't test it. You can't prove it. It's not science. There's no way that a tree's going to stand there for that long. And they find these trees broke off, upside down, or sections of them in the desert.
That shows that there was a worldwide flood that could fossilize and pick up those trees and rapidly fossilize those things.
Ethan, it's not hard to figure out that the law of cause and effect states that for everything that comes into existence, there's a cause. And so therefore, the cause of the universe, if it created time, must be outside of time. If it created space, it must be outside of space. If it created matter, says the law of cause and effect.
So where does it specifically state that in order for this to be created, something outside of it has to create it?
Do you think unconsciousness is going to cause consciousness? Have you ever observed that?
No, I haven't.
Why would you believe that? So you'd have to believe that it was a conscious being that created consciousness. Because remember, the law of cause and effect and the first law of thermodynamic state that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be converted. So if there was no matter and energy, which all of science agrees that at one point there was nothing, either somebody created it or nobody created it and it poofed into existence magically. That's what the Big Bang even is. It's a poof. It's an imagination.
The chances for a single protein, for a single protein, just one, is 10 to the 164th power.
Who here thinks that 10 to the 164th power could happen by chance? Trillions of times over, right? Because there's trillions of proteins.
Those are impossible chances. And for all that to have come about without a God, I think it's impossible.
Everything's tending towards chaos. The sun's getting smaller, the moon's getting further from Earth, the Earth is slowing down. They always say, give it more time and everything will happen. Like, you know, you can have fish to fishermen over time, bacteria to biologists. Just give us more time. Time is their God.
But it takes longer than that, Ken. That's the problem. You won't allow us the time. You always tell us that the time is the religion. It's not enough time, Ken. We need more time.
Okay, let's give them more time. The sun's burning down. The moon's getting further from Earth. The Earth's slowing down. Things are heading to a point where we can't even live. So just give it more time. If we give it more time, it's going to be bad. Evolution can't work. It can't work with time. It can't work without time.
Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished.
We have an obligation to help our brothers and sisters. And yes, an atheist actually is a brother and sister by blood. Are they part of the spiritual family? No, they need to be grafted into us. Then they become our spiritual brother. But right now they're outside and it's up to us to bring them in. And what's happened is they've been diluted and lied to. And they're mad at us for telling them that they were lied to. Why? Why are you mad at us? It makes no sense. You're mad, you're hating me, and I'm really going out of my way to tell you the truth. Why? So you can hate me? Of course not. I'm doing everything in my power to tell you that you were lied to. And I'm going out of my way to show you how you were lied to. And I want to bring you to the truth of what's really going on. And nothing is more of a destruction of that than the thought of evolution. Their books change every 10 years. They change the dates on everything. They change everything. And they'll tell you, oh, it's because we have more information now. No, it's because you've been falsified or you flopped on something and it has to be changed or else you're just going to be wrong forever. So what's really going on is the school is teaching you something by law that they have to, and they don't allow any other theory in, and it's protected by law, so they don't allow any other model. And then you've been indoctrinated in this just the same way that your teacher has, so they don't grasp anything outside that. They're not allowed to think outside the box, even though they tell you, go ahead, you can think about whatever you want. I'm a good teacher. You can put on that test any answer you want. Yeah, really? Then how come this one book is all you give me to study from and to give the answers from? If you were really truthful, you would have a blank test with maybe a couple generic questions that you would allow me to free think and give an answer to, not out of one book, but out of multiple books. But instead, it's an indoctrination tool. Remember, Rockefellers funded the academic society and said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. Why did he say that? Because the more we free think and the more that we think about things, we become an individual and we can think for ourselves. Why does the military want you when you're young and not old? Because you're never going to fall in line and be indoctrinated. They need you when you're ripe and young and your mind is easily indoctrinated. So here's how schools trick you. They come along and they throw a math class at you. Well, guess what? Math is a fact. It's true. 2 + 2 is 4. I don't care where you go. And then they throw you in an English class. Well, everyone's speaking English. That must be true. And then they tell you about history and they explain things to you. And then they throw you in this random evolutionary class where everything's subjective and changes all the time and they're mixed with truth and lies, and then all of a sudden to you it's true because every other class you go to is true. So you're like, well, why would they lie to me? Obviously everything else is true, so therefore this is true. So you don't even question it. It's just given to you. It's just another book out of another book on the shelf, and therefore it is true. So you've been indoctrinated, and you can easily fall out of it, but it gets harder because you've got to remember, you've been taught this from junior high, all those years, and then through high school, all those years, and then you get into college and all those years. That is 1 hour out of every day of your life all of those years of school, you think that's going to be easy to break with some guy walking up to you and saying evolution's a lie? You're going to be like, this dude's on crack. Evolution, what are you talking about? We see evolution all around us. A baby evolves into an adult. Grass evolves into corn. I mean, everything evolves. What are you talking about? So there's so much of a hurdle for us to get over, because what we've done is we've made this generation of people that are ingrained into thinking in only one way. And evolution is the only way that there is. And there's only one model. And there's only one explanation. There isn't. There are more explanations, and they can be answered now, and there's more than one model, and our model is so good. It's never been seen before this good. Even 20 years ago, it wasn't nearly as good as it is now. I recommend people reading Replacing Darwin. It does replace the evolutionary model, and it's a really good explanation as to why that model is not good and ours is superior.
You ask an evolutionist or an atheist, what is the meaning of life? Just ask them that. And they'll respond back with, well, my meaning of my life is whatever I make up. What they're admitting is that they're making up, or make-believing, a purpose for life. They don't think there actually is any purpose. And so they say, well, I'll just make up purpose. That's make-believe, folks.
Why is it that some of the least religious places on earth are so sad that they need to take antidepressants every single day? I would plead that it's because without God, without a purpose in life, I think that man has to look at himself and say, what am I doing on this planet? Then you wonder why so many people commit suicide. Why am I here? How do I know that tree exists? How do I know this wall exists? How do I know this lamp exists? How do I know you exist? And then, because, you know, all I know that exists is evil. So if everything is evil, I must be evil. I must be a product of evil. I'm doing something good because I'm killing evil. That is what happens when you don't have God.
O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called,